Bilbo and company are forced to engage in a war against an army of combatants and keep the Lonely Mountain from falling into the hands of a rising darkness. This is my review of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. So I went to see this movie with my dad a few weeks ago, and this was the last movie on my most anticipated movie list. And after seeing it with my dad, I have to tell you guys that I thought The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies was good. The good points. There are actually 5 things in this movie that I thought were equal to one another and that brought this movie to life. And those things would be the directing by Peter Jackson, the visual effects, the costume design, the production design, and the makeup. There were some parts of Peter Jackson's directing that I didn't like, but I think he was at his best when the battle scenes were happening. Because when these battle scenes are happening, it's like, oh my god, it's epic, and But I thought that Peter Jackson also did a good job of bringing the scope of this movie to an epic scale. Like he did in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and in the last Hobbit movie as well. The visual effects were good for what it did. The makeup brought the elves, the orcs, the dwarves to life. And I loved the production and costume designs, since I felt like I was in Middle-earth again. The acting in this movie was probably the best out of the entire Hobbit trilogy. And I think the person that did the best job was the actor that played Thorin. And he also had Martin Freeman, who played Bilbo, and Ian McKellen, who played Gandalf, that also did a good job. And there were other members of the cast that did a good job as well. Other things that I thought were done well were the cinematography with all the camera shots. I thought were done well like they have always been in this trilogy and in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The sound design, since I felt like I was in the middle of these close combat sword fights or sword battles or just battles in general, or in the middle of Smaug breathing fire down on the village. I thought the editing was good for the first and second acts of this movie. And I'll say for my final good point that there was some writing that I liked in the movie as well. And most of that writing had to do with Thorin's development in the movie. The bad points. The one thing that I did not like about this movie was the writing. And there are some things that I cannot explain because they'll sort of spoil stuff, but there are some things that I can't explain. Yeah, so just like in the Desolation of Smaug, I thought the romance in the Battle of the Five Armies was just awful. I thought it was bad. I didn't really understand why there had to be a romance in the first place, and I still don't, because I didn't see anything worthy for this romance to happen in the movie. I didn't see any need for the Alfred character in this movie, and for those of you that don't know, Alfred was the right-hand man for the evil mayor of Lake Town. But basically he was there for comedy or comedic relief. And when those parts happened, I was laughing a little bit, but then when I was starting to think about more and more after I left the theater and went back home, I was like, actually, we didn't really need him because we could have focused with the time spent on Alfred on other characters that needed that time, or on other things that needed that time. And another character that wasn't really needed in this movie was Smaug, and I can't really explain why because that'll spoil something, but I'll explain myself later on in the spoiler section along with some other points that I have to make. For the visual effects, I thought there was like several places for the visual effects that I thought were just bad. And that's because when I saw some of these visual effects, they looked like they weren't either done or they weren't rendered right. And for example, there are these ghostly figures that appear in the movie, and when you see these ghostly figures, take a good look at them, because if you look at them closely, you can see that they aren't even done or they aren't rendered. To be honest, it looked like I was looking at some sort of PS2 video game graphic or something. The only other bad point I can come up with is with several points of direction by Peter Jackson. But those several points are just like nitpicky things that I was just annoyed by, and they aren't really worth mentioning. So like I said, I saw this movie with my dad. My dad gives this movie a 3.5 out of 4 stars, while I give it a 3 out of 4 stars. I thought that it was better than An Unexpected Journey, but not as good as The Desolation of Smaug. I think The Desolation of Smaug is the best Hobbit movie of the trilogy. But if you're a fan of the Hobbit trilogy and a fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and just a fan in general of fantasy movies, then I think you should see this movie for sure. Alright, spoilers for The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then get over now, because I'm going to be talking about some bad points from the spoilers that I was mentioning before, and I'll be talking about some surprises as well. So if you still want to be surprised or don't know about any of these bad points that I'm talking about, then get over now if you still want to be surprised or don't know anything. Yeah, so I don't know why Smaug is in the movie, since he's only in the movie for like 6 or 7 minutes, because he dies at the beginning of the movie. I mean, I get why he's in the beginning of the movie because of the way Desolation of Smaug ended, but to me it just felt like really weird that we just saw Smaug for like 5, 6, or 7 minutes, and then it's like, nope, yeah, he's gone, let's just go to the rest of the story now. I thought the entire scene that we saw at the beginning of the Battle of the Five Armies should have been the ending for the Desolation of Smaug, so that more time was saved for other things. And speaking of time, the Alfred character should not have been in this movie because he took up too much time in the movie, in my opinion. That could have been spent on other things, like I said earlier on. And one of those things that could have been spent more time on were some other characters, like the other dwarves. And more time could have been spent on, like, what happened to the Arkham Stone. A day later, after I saw the movie, I was sort of thinking about it. I was like, what happened to the Arkham Stone, actually? And the last time I saw the Arkham Stone was when the Elf Lord, or the Elf King, I forgot what his name was, but he had the stone, he was showing it to Thorin, who was on the wall, and then he, like, placed it back in his robe or something. And I wonder why that didn't have some sort of resolution, because that was a small focal point throughout the entire trilogy, was the Arkham Stone. And I also didn't like how there was not enough time for the resolution for the people of Lake Town. Because the last time I remember seeing the people of Lake Town was in the city of Dane, or whatever the city was called. And after the battle happened, there was like no mention of them again. I was like, wait, what happened to those people? And I think there could have been a little bit more time spent on the main battle, because it sort of felt weird when Bilbo and other dwarves diverged from the main battle and went to that small outpost on the hill. Because after that we had small moments of the film going back to the main battle, only like for 20 seconds or something. And then later on at the end of the battle when the orcs were retreating. Because to me it felt like this. It felt like in the main battle we just saw like the first half of it, and when Thorin came charging out with the rest of the dwarves, it felt like we didn't see the second half of the main battle. So it would have been nice to like have a little bit more of the main battle, like the second half of it. And the last spoiler I will say is with Thorin's death. So I have not read the Hobbit book, so I did not know what to expect in this movie. And when he finally died, after talking to Bilbo, and when Bilbo was like not accepting that Thorin was actually dead, and when he was starting to cry, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna cry. So that was my review of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Hope you guys liked it, and other than that, guys, that's it.